Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ACE live webinar series presented by the American Council on Exercise. My name is Jackie Crockford, and I will be your host. For today's live presentation, we are going to be talking about loaded movement training for the golden years. I am joined by our presenter today, Mr. Sam Berry. Sam, how are you?
Well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
So in just a few minutes, Sam is going to be talking to us about how we should be, as fitness professionals, coaching our clients through loaded movement training, our older clientele specifically. So we'll get into that in just a few minutes. But first, let's talk about a little bit of housekeeping. So you are joining us today on your GoToWebinar dashboard. You should see a hand symbol on that dashboard. It's a clear hand symbol with a green arrow. So feel free, if you would, just go ahead and click that hand symbol for us, and that just lets us know that we are coming in loud and clear. Make sure you click that hand symbol and raise your hand. So I see a few hands popping up. Perfect. Tamara and Susanna, Sophia, Ruth and Robert, Richard, thank you guys so much. Looks like everybody is hearing us loud and clear. If you do have any issues during today's presentation, technical issues especially, please feel free to use your questions box. Type in your question there if you are having technical issues, and I will be monitoring those throughout the presentation today. Also, if you have questions related to our content for our presenter, Sam, we will be taking those questions towards the end of the presentation, so make sure you jot those down in the questions box as well. So we will take some time after the presentation is over to go through those questions. And once again, I'll be monitoring those throughout the presentation. So feel free and use that questions box at any time throughout the presentation today. You are joining us for free. Thank you for listening in and taking the time out of your busy schedules to listen to this great topic. Again, if you would like to receive CECs for today's topic, you would need to visit the link that is on your screen, acefitness.org/past webinars. There you will need to purchase the quiz and recorded version of today's presentation that will go into your My ACE account. And once you pass that quiz, you will be awarded 0.1 CECs within your My ACE account. So once again, you are listening today for free. Thank you for taking the time and joining us. And if you have any questions about that, once again, feel free to use your questions box. So before we get started, let's talk about our presenter, Mr. Sam Berry, ACE Master Trainer Extraordinaire, joining us from here in San Diego. So Sam has been with ACE and the ACE family for quite a while, has been a master trainer with us for the past 7 years, and has done a lot for the industry. He's a rugby coach as well, and amazing rugby player. He probably wouldn't tell you that, but he is a great athlete himself. So has worked with a lot of different clients throughout the years, spanning a great age range. So Sam, tell us a little bit about why you enjoy working with different ages of clients and specifically the older generations.
You know, the populations that I work with I'm very grateful. They're fantastic. Everybody I work with, I learn so much from. I think I learned the most from my senior population, those that are in the golden years. Obviously, because, well, I'm not there yet, and I see what can come, and what happens when you do the right things, and the way you treat yourself, your biological and chronological ages, and how they differ, and what you can go through if you don't go the right path. So those folks that are in their golden years have given me a lot of insight and some forethought, and I learn just as much as they do from me. So it's a great reciprocating relationship with those folks.
Awesome. So we're going to be talking about that relationship just a little bit during your presentation today and how you would specifically be coaching them through some different movement patterns. Sam also does participate as part of the research with the Stanford Lucile Packard Children's Hospital. And tell us a little bit about that as well, because that's a different age group that you're working with there.
Yeah, that's an amazing age group. We're doing 32-week exercise intervention for pediatric heart transplant recipients. And we're doing a live online training with these little heroes. They're 1 to 5 years out of getting a complete heart transplant. And we do 16 weeks of 3 times a week exercise intervention, where we give these kiddos exercise tubing, a medicine ball, sliding discs, and a jump rope. And we do it wherever they are, at their home, or we have some of the kids that are at the Ronald McDonald House, and they work hard. They work harder than some of my clients. It's really great, and they're fun.
Great. So moving from these younger heroes, like you said, hopefully training them throughout their life to be active into their golden years. That's where we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Sam, and we'll get started. And once again, if anybody has any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to use your questions box. And Sam, let's talk about some loaded movement training.
Thanks, Jackie. Thanks, Dace, for having me be a subject matter expert. I find myself learning just as much as I do when I'm teaching. So this is always a great experience for me to do this and provide for my colleagues out in the industry, and hopefully help you evolve your training modalities and be able to apply some of this immediately today. I think the biggest thing we need to do is first define what loaded movement training is, and that is such a ominous kind of definition, and we all probably have our own definition of it. For the sake of this workshop, where we're going with this is everything that's under gravitational load, coming at us at 9.81 meters per second squared, is loaded. If we were on the moon, it'd be a whole different story. Nonetheless, we're under gravitational load, and that is loaded movement. So with especially that senior population, if they can't move their own body weight under gravitational load, then we've got to rethink adding external load to them. So moving well and modifying that loaded movement training under gravitational load through body weight training is something that we're going to play around with today, and hopefully I can give you some pretty good nuggets and exercises that might help you, and modalities. Hydrodynamic loaded training is a great way to offload away from gravitational load, and those hydro aerobic classes are fantastic for folks that are battling some structural and musculoskeletal restrictions that we'll talk about in our considerations for loaded training later. Wind resistance, things like a rowing machine is wind resistance, and they do have the hydrodynamic rowing machines as well. But that's another modality of loaded movement training. And for the sake of today, we're going to spend a little more time on external loads and externally loading our clients. And we all think of our traditional external loads and tools, such as our barbells, plate-loaded kind of Nautilus style machines, dumbbells, cable machines, and adjustable cable pulley systems like free motion, medicine balls, obviously, and resistance bands. And there's such a dynamic array of types of medicine balls, resistance bands. Heck, they have cable machines now that are pneumatic and Bluetooth enabled. I saw those at URSA. It's pretty amazing stuff that they have. So even the traditional external loads are evolving and improving to become more efficient for clients and fitness professionals. The external loads that I work with a lot and more contemporary, meaning they've come out more recently. You have the Viper, which is something that the group from Institute of Motion and Michal Dalcourt developed. It's a great kind of functional training tool, incredibly versatile, big fan of it. Obviously, you have kettlebells, steel maces, and steel clubs. Those are can be intimidating, certainly for a golden year kind of senior population, but very versatile and great tool if you're using it with safety and knowledge. Indian clubs are amazing tools as well for shoulder mobility and coordination. The RMT and BOSU is a pretty new tool that the group behind David Weck have developed. I'm seeing a lot of cool acceleration, deceleration, functional movement patterning with those tools. Now they've made some great progressions there. Super bands are one of my favorite tools for assisted as well as resisted loaded movement training for my clients. Sandbags, everybody knows TRX and suspension training. Flex disc is a new tool that I've helped refine and develop, and it's a cool tool for loaded kind of ground-based movement patterning. That's early on in its development, and is great for ground-based movement. Weight vests are fantastic with a lot of these movements and these tools as well. So there can be a mix and match with the contemporary and the traditional tools. So ultimately, patterns and principles are most important. It's not the tool that you're using. And why would we ultimately want to load our clients? What's so important about that stuff? It's obvious that bone mineral density is a huge proponent, factor for our clients, and making sure that they're not going toward that or slowing down the process of osteopenia into osteoporosis. The more loaded patterns and training that we do, the most common places, the hips, the wrists, the spine, if those aren't being loaded with more than just activities of daily living, all the research is pointing to that reduction in expedited osteopenia and osteoporosis, and the risk of falls and fractures of the hips and the wrists. It's not a good path to go down for our clients. And if they can take a fall and just get a little bump or a bruise and not a fracture, we're doing the right things for them. So obviously we want to decrease muscular atrophy and make sure that as they do have atrophy, and they will have atrophy, that we're slowing down that process, increasing the tensile strength of the tendinous junctions and the fascial slings, making sure that they have the ability to have a fall and don't not only fracture a bone, but tear a ligament or a tendon or a meniscus or a labrum, things that we hear too often, our clients having a tragic contact injury and having these kind of devastating injuries that can age them very quickly. It also improves their hormonal balances. We have way too much cortisol in our lives already, and if we can decrease it even further, that's going to help reduce inflammation in the body, which is ultimately a huge factor in the aging process. Increased growth hormones. We don't have much of them as we age, and they reduce the secretion of it and decreases even further, especially if we're not getting enough sleep through the night. And I know a lot of my senior clients don't get a full night's sleep, and there's huge evidence that if we're not getting more that 7 to 8 hours of sleep, we're not getting that growth hormone secretion that we need to ultimately repair the body and recover from the trauma that we put it through the day before. And so if they're waking up in the middle of the night, not getting a full night's sleep, growth hormone secretion is going to be impaired. And we need to have that ability to repair and reduce the cortisol and inflammation in our body with those. Increased peripheral nervous system and central nervous system communication in that feedback loop. Proprioception is something that's quickly lost, and things like neuropathy, which we'll have to consider in our programming, increases. And my father, he's 74, and he's getting symptoms of neuropathy, and we need to make sure that that is slowed down. And I know my uncle, who's 76, has neuropathy, and we need to work on that. And I'm trying to help those guys out with that as we speak. So I'm sure you guys can relate with me on that. Ultimately, we want them to be able to live their lives autonomously and have function through activities of daily living. That's the underlying most important thing for loaded movement training. We want to make them live well and thrive, not survive. But before we do any of that loaded movement, we got to assess and screen. We can't just dive in and see the exercises I show you on this presentation or pop up YouTube and say, oh, that's a neat one. And we all will Google exercises for seniors or something like that, and see a multitude of different movements that may or may not be right. It's a risky thing to do that kind of thing. And if you're not doing the assessing beforehand, you're just throwing a dart blindfolded at a dartboard. And it's in that area, but probably not a safe process. So keep your systems and your processes sound. Do your static postural assessments. Take a look at all planes of motion. Being mindful of transverse plane rotation in the pelvis, in the T-spine. Obviously, we have to be respectful of scoliosis. And you see the common postural alignments that we have our clients often coming to us. Especially, I have a lot of senior men that have that kyphotic, flat back, kind of posterior tilt posture that are suffering from herniations in the lumbar spine. You get that L4, L5, S1 kind of dysfunction from being seated and forward flexed, spending a lot of time in front of a computer or in a seated position for decades. The connective tissue can only take so much of that load longitudinally and in a fixed position. That last picture on the right, we get a lot of that from people carrying one-sided and unilateral load for a lot of years. And we get the hip elevation and the contralateral elevation in the shoulders and that scoliosis. It's a vicious cycle. So if we're going to load people and they have these kind of postural alignments, common postural dysfunctions, be prepared to have further dysfunction and be more restorative before you're loading anything else. Other considerations, we've talked about this already a bit, but structural system, make sure you're getting a full health intake. Even when you do have them do a full health intake, it's not uncommon for you to do that postural evaluation and them telling you, oh yeah, I did have XYZ when I was younger, but I didn't think that was important. I have people say that they ruptured their Achilles tendon when they were a teenager, and they never allude to that because they didn't think it was an important thing later on in life. But that set everything else up for the next X number of decades of their gait and their function through life. So joint replacements, I have I've had quite a few clients with bilateral knee, hip replacements, getting the shoulder replacements or something like that, or some kind of replacement or screw in their wrists or arms. So you've got to be very mindful of that. And if ever you have that situation, make sure you do not do vibration training on those joints. Just a heads up on that. Very dangerous to jostle that replacement out. Osteoarthritis, osteopenia, huge importance. With people with osteoarthritis, there's going to be some level of pain, and it's kind of one of those things, if we don't move it through and have some level of toleration, in loaded or unloaded through hydrodynamic training or assisted band movement, we're going to continue to have that pain. So getting them through that initial discomfort is important to get them to get that synovial fluid in the joint and tolerating functional movements. Rheumatoid arthritis is a really tricky one, and something that you might want to further investigate and work through, because people can have flare-ups of the arthritis or their medications not working for them at that time, and you have to adapt quickly. You may have a great program and it be maybe written down perfectly and you're going by the IFT model, but if they have a flare-up, that program is going to change really quickly. So be dynamic and be able to think on your feet with that, and do your research if you have those clients with the RA. Ligament damage, like I said, if we have MCL, ACL, your Achilles tendon damage, you have to respect that. Plantar fasciitis and the likes. Wrist, you get a lot of the wrist injuries or tender kind of compartment syndromes that can really flare up. You have the tennis elbow and golfer's elbow, lateral and medial epicondylitis. is abundant with my senior clients that we have to work through. Be really mindful. Don't let those ligamentous tissues get further damaged. That's a longer, slower repair cycle, especially for our seniors. And in distal areas, it takes slower, a lot longer for Achilles to repair than it does for an MCL, because it's further and greater or less blood flow in those areas. Active system considerations there. Cramping, medication will affect that. Hydration will affect that. Make sure that they're getting plenty of hydration. We'll talk about that a little bit further. Overuse injuries, there's an abundance of that. Chronic hypertonicity, that goes back to what we saw here. If I have a person with some kind of scoliosis, which I have a lovely woman that has scoliosis, that has chronic hypertonicity in her right upper trapezius, you'll see that. And if we can mitigate that and do some corrective strategies, or alleviate it with some self-myofascial release initially before we get into the loaded movement training, that's going to significantly help the function of her movement patterns once we get into phase 2 and phase 3 of the IFT model. So the neurological systems, as I alluded to, peripheral neuropathy is very dangerous, especially when you're getting into that stability part and getting loaded movement. You want to be careful with that, because they have a reduction of proprioception. They don't know exactly, well, what their feet are feeling. And we have over 15,000 proprioceptors in our feet. And if they've been in what I like to call coffins for your feet, aka shoes, they're sliding their feet's ability to feel what it is it's on. And if they're wearing orthotics, which they may have to, and that's okay. If we can get them to feel some barefoot, if they can tolerate some level of barefoot training in a ground-based setting, that's going to help reduce and reduce that neuropathy and help increase proprioceptive feedback, and those ground reaction forces. We're going in the right direction. Stroke and seizures, vertigo are really tricky and very challenging for people to work through, and for trainers to work through. And sticking to ground-based stuff and really slow movement patterns is where we go. We hang out in IFD 1 and 2, maybe for the duration of their training. Circulatory system, huge factor there. Venous pooling, varicose veins, you got to be very mindful of those, and making sure that if we're doing vertically loaded movement training, if they have venous pooling, that's going to increase a risk of lightheadedness and changing from transitional postures from the ground to up to down, and quick movement patterning can cause some lightheadedness and even kind of positional vertigo type of symptoms. So be mindful of that and progress slowly. Heart conditions, we always have to respect and be mindful of that. I'm a big fan of having our clients wear heart rate monitors and checking that out, and checking out if they don't have a heart rate monitor, taking a quick radial pulse and asking them what their rate of perceived exertion is, and comparing their heart rate to their RPE. Are they matching up where they should be? So be mindful of that. Obviously, we have to ask these kind of questions before you get into the loaded movement training. What's their hydration level? In conjunction with that, what kind of medication they're on, and is that causing them to be dehydrated or have cotton mouth? So be mindful of those things, and what kind of medication affect the risk of strain or sprain in the connective tissue. A lot of the medication will, and different mixes and matches can increase the risk of sprains and strains. So be mindful of that in conjunction with their hydration. At the very minimum, they should be having an ounce of water per kilogram of body weight. That's a real low end. For me, an ounce of water per pound of body weight is probably even better. And for a lot of our senior population, that's not realistic, because they'd be on the toilet most of the day. So, you have to be realistic with that and mindful of that situation there. Fueling, if they exercised before they've exercised, what kind of fueling have they had? If they're pre-diabetic or diabetic, are their blood sugar levels in the right place? Respect that as well. Sleep, like I said, if they're not getting enough sleep, or if they're getting broken up sleep through the night, you have to be mindful of that, because that's also going to increase their stress levels. And what kind of environmental factors, the humidity, temperatures, are they in a controlled environment? Do we have a nice 72 degrees like we do here in San Diego all the time? Or are you in New England, where it can go from 47 degrees and freezing to 90 degrees and 100% humidity in 2 days? Play it by ear and adjust accordingly. Again, programming is perfect, but life is not. So we have to adjust to those kind of considerations before we load. Progressions, work from the ground up. You have to go there first. And if they can't get on the ground because of dysfunction, put them on a physio table, or an increase a higher height to get them on their back, or supine and prone and quadruped, where it's a little bit more manageable for them to get up and down from there, and on a softer surface. I don't know about you folks, and you can chime in here, but if I can get my clients down on the floor, that's part of the workout. Getting them up and down is a huge component to the training session. They may think of it as an inconvenience. I think of it as an opportunity to improve their activities of daily living, and assess how they're moving. And I'll ask them to get up on their non-dominant side, see how they do with that, and cue them on bracing the core instead of trying to hold on to a railing to get up without something to rely on. That's a big one. Have you had anybody give any feedback on that, Jackie?
Yes, we have had a few people just comment in, and remember, you can use your GoToWebinar dashboard, use the questions box if you'd like to comment in on anything that Sam is talking about right now. But we have had a few people just comment and mention that it is important for them working with their older clientele to be getting up and off the floor. And sometimes, like you said, that might be part of the workout itself for those type of clientele. But I think most of us are in agreement there that that's a good aspect of the training program for sure.
Thanks for the feedback, folks. As you well know, all of our muscles, when we're vertically loaded, are doing some low level isometrics. So if we key in on the physiological requirements of those stabilization muscles, and not necessarily do just eccentric and concentric movement patterns, but really dial into some isometric contractions, especially for that lumbopelvic region in a ground-based position, isometric abduction and adduction exercises you can find on the ACE exercise library. Get that muscle under attention, and have them be mindful of relatively symmetrical contractions, left to right, anterior to posterior. When you're doing an isometric supine abduction, are they getting equal amounts of activation in the external rotators of the hip? If they're not, have them press out as long as they can until they feel like they're getting relatively equal activation. That's just helping that peripheral central nervous system feedback loop kind of wake itself up and get them going and moving well on the ground, and working their way up to then prone and quadruped, and getting those movements, and then real slow eccentric movement patterns to follow after that. We're stronger eccentrically than we are concentrically, and if we can increase eccentric strength, there's going to be a concurrent improvement in their concentric strength. So I spend a lot more time on kind of that 3 to 5 to even 6 second eccentric movement pattern before I do the faster kind of concentric. And even if I'm doing a faster, slightly faster concentric, I'm doing that without momentum, and really making sure that they're not going into a compensatory pattern. You know, when you're doing any kind of push pattern, you all have seen this. When somebody's doing, whether it's an incline push-up or a ground-based push-up, when they start to fatigue, where do the shoulders go? Up and internally rotated. So I want to make sure that they're avoiding that compensatory pattern, not using the upper trapezius, areas that they get that chronic hypertonicity to start to kick in when they want them to, when they shouldn't. So when we get into that IFT model and we get to those kind of overlaps, you see the Venn diagram type of overlaps between 1 and 2, 2 and 3. We're going to be using some level of loaded training in phases 1 and 2. For the sake of the IFT model, when they refer to the loaded training, that's using some of our traditional loads and our contemporary loads in more dynamic movement pattern type of base training. Your pushes and pulls, your lunging and single leg pattern stuff, and hip hinging patterns. We want to do the more anaerobic resistance training, your traditional type of 3 sets of 8 to 12 reps under load. We're going to do some of that with phase 2, but very light level and focusing on the eccentric, isometric, and real slow concentric kind of stuff, and making sure those movement patterns are as clean as possible, and using gravity as our load in phases 1 and 2, and assisting the gravitational load with some tubing and doing some of that kind of good fun stuff. We have to make sure we have the stability where we need it. If we don't have the right stability in the pelvis, the ST joint, the knees and elbows, and especially in the feet and hands, we're not going to have the right mobility, there's a feedback loop between those. If the hips and the T-spine, glenohumeral joint, ankles and wrists don't have the right mobility, then we're going to have a mobility where there should be stability. That's a risky thing. And then we start getting painful movement versus non-painful movement, and dysfunctional movement versus functional movement. And when we're focusing on getting the function, we want to spend our time on the non-painful dysfunctional movement patterns to clean those up. Because if we're spending a bunch of time on painful movements, the peripheral system and the central nervous system are going to just tell you that that movement pattern is going to be not authentic, and feed more pain in other joints above and below the area that's painful. So we've got to really be diligent about cleaning up the non-painful dysfunctional movement patterns and spending time on functional movement patterns. If it's painful, try to avoid that movement pattern as much as you can. If they have osteoarthritis, assisting that movement pattern and unloading it to reduce the level of pain to be tolerable and clean in its movement pattern is something we may have to work through. There's no magic pill for that, and hopefully there'll never be one, because I don't think that's a myth for that longitudinally for thriving through life and not surviving. So when we get into the movement-based training, we've talked about this, our 5 basic movement patterns. When we get into bend and lift patterns, we all see our clients try to squat, and it doesn't look all that pretty in their golden years unless they've been spending a lot of time in yoga and doing some great movement-based training throughout their life. I have many clients that have bad knees, very limited ankle dorsiflexion, closed chain dorsiflexion. So squatting is really tough for them. I deadlift them. I make sure that they have a really clean hip hinging pattern with a really nice postural alignment, and they're not flexing the back. I spend a lot of time holding onto a dowel up and down their spine. That's cleaning up that hip hinge pattern, and I do that one-legged position. That's killing 2 birds with 1 stone, using a dowel up and down the spine, and having them standing on one leg and reaching back toward a wall or some kind of object to have some kinesthetic feedback. And that's part of, after I'm down in the ground-based stuff, I get them up and doing movement patterning and cleaning up that movement pattern with the bend and lift and single leg work all at once. So when it comes to pushing, my ratios are always 2 to 1 pull to push, because everything that we do through life, driving, eating, working in front of a computer, reading a book, using our smartphones and our tablets, is all in that anterior forward flex kyphotic position. So I'm not going to feed those patterns, certainly in the golden years, even more. And I go 2, maybe even 3 to 1 pulling to pushing. So spending a lot of time on horizontal and vertical pull patterns for the upper body. That's really important when I get to that loaded patterning. Horizontal pushes are sometimes the only pushes I do, because if they're in that kyphotic forward flex position and have that kind of scapular abduction, abduction, and internal rotation in the glenohumeral joint, doing a vertical load is going to likely cause some irritation to the biceps tendon, supraspinatus, and just aggravate a whole lot of stuff, because they've got a huge amount of restriction in the pec complex, shortening of the bicep, and that whole front arm sling that we deal with chronically with even folks that are not in their golden years. I have 10-year-olds that are already dealing with biceps tendonitis because of what they do on a daily basis in on their phones and all the kind of social media craze and Instagram and Snapchat and all that crazy stuff. It's amazing. It's really tragic what they're doing already is what we're just starting to see in some of our senior clients. So last but not least is rotational phase of that movement training, and preventing rotation is more important initially than creating it. Things like your side planks and side lying patterns and kind of those Palloff press or iso press kind of movement patterns preventing rotation are really important. We'll talk about that, and you'll see some of those exercises in some of the later slides. So when we get into the phase 1 function, we go, I always start supine, and then we go side lying, prone, going into some rolling patterns if they're willing and able to do it. A lot of my senior clients look at me like, you want me to do what? You want me to roll around on the floor? Yes, I want you to roll on the floor. It's okay. You'll understand why. And that's one of our first movement patterns when we were in the crib, is being able to roll from our back to our stomach and cry and have somebody put us back on our back, and then repeat until we finally figure out how to roll back onto our back. And that's a primitive pattern that we need to restore for function of that lumbopelvic region and a healthy back and deep stabilizers of the lumbopelvic region. Transitional postures are that getting down and up from the ground. It's an underappreciated and not respected enough kind of portion of training for our seniors. I do as much of it as they will let me do for them. There's some give and take on that, as you all well know, for sure. So, that may look like a lot of weight on that young lady that models hips, but that's probably an aluminum bar and 5-pound plate. So it looks bigger than it is. But for the sake of it, using some kind of external load on the hips and pressing up against that is going to be a great tool for building up those hip extensors. It's really important when we do any kind of loaded glute bridge that they're not getting any synergistic dominance. And that synergistic dominance would come from the lumbar spine or the hamstrings, and sometimes they'll get cramping in the calves. You may have to change the angle of the knees and maybe have them go into some level of dorsiflexion, so they're really pushing through the heels and not transferring their load into the front of the feet. And if they have really restricted hip flexors, they may not be able to get into the right hip extension. They may also have the propensity to allow their knees to cave in and create internal rotation in the hips, which is going to even further exacerbate that inability to turn on the external rotators and the hip extenders. So instead of putting a load on the front of the hips, put some resistance around the knees and have them push out against, say, a mini band or resistance tubing. So they're getting that kind of reactive neuromuscular training and feeding their mistake. And if you kind of magnify what you're cueing them not to do by giving them kind of this kinesthetic cue of, oh, this is pulling me in, push out against it, that's going to give them a big kind of aha moment, and you don't have to be a broken record and keep cueing them to push the knees out, push through the heels, and finally getting those glutes to fire up when you're doing a supine glute bridge. This a side lying and side plank position. That picture you see there, that's a pretty tough movement. Certainly something I would do later on in the third phase of the IFT model, but it's there as an example for things that can be utilized to progress planks. How would I make a regression or make that a better movement pattern? I would shorten up the fulcrum by having my senior clients go from the knees versus the feet. And if they have any kind of dysfunction in the shoulder, certainly not loading it up and making sure they're getting the right kind of scapular packing and shoulder packing, and making sure that they're not shrugging the shoulder and forward flexing and rotating the shoulder downward toward the floor, or the chest down toward the floor. That's a great movement. You can do that through vertical load, which is ultimately that's a vertical pull in a side lying position. You can turn and change the position, so it's more of a horizontal row in a side plank position, one of my favorites. And then ultimately you could hold a weight on the hip to add external load, similar to kind of what we saw in this previous slide here. Okay, the next ones are very progressive and very challenging. Kind of what I would call a renegade row. It's kind of a prone high plank row is a very challenging movement, that left picture there. Certainly something would be well into that third phase of the IFT model. Having them just hold a prone high plank is going to be very challenging. And even the one on the right, fantastic movement. We have load. As soon as those arms go further out to the sides, there's a greater amount of demand of the middle trapezius and thoracic extenders there. That's very challenging to have a lot of people get in that position. And also having them breathe normally. That's a very challenging position for a lot of my senior clients. Big fan of that one, especially for those folks that have that kyphotic forward flex position. Having them hold that without any load. Those arms are load, folks. So be mindful to probably start with that before going to the picture on the left. So prone kind of T shape. Again, be mindful of the hypertonic kind of elevation of the shoulders and getting that upper trapezius overworking. That's going to be a common synergistically dominant pattern, elevation and kind of this forward flexion, internal rotation of the shoulder in that posture. The next one, the rolling patterns. Hard to get clients to do, but very important, really rich with a lot of feedback here. This picture I took from the Titleist Performance Institute. That's a very brilliant man there, Dr. Greg Rose, doing a star rolling pattern. And that's a rolling from the ground up using resistance tubing called a gray cook band, and putting the loops around the feet and holding the bands up overhead at the other end, or the middle of the tubing, and creating a load and compression from head to toe there in an overhead position. Now, if my clients don't have the right glenohumeral joint mobility, that's going to be a tough position to get into. So that load, if they can't keep the arms overhead with a full extension in the elbow without shrugging the shoulders, that's going to be something that I have to work on before loading up that pattern. Nonetheless, just rolling using the lower body and kind of pulling through with the upper body. Have your clients imagine they're paralyzed from the waist up, and have them try to roll using just the lower body and have the upper body be disassociated from the lower body. It's a really challenging movement. Try it yourself, certainly, before you do it yourself. There's some great rolling pattern videos. If you go and look some of these up, filter through some of it. And if you have questions, I can definitely steer you in the right direction if you have any questions on that. But rolling pattern with tubing is a fantastic feedback loop, and getting that core really fired up and working very authentically with the quadratus laborum, multifidus, diaphragm, and transverse abdominis. getting into quadruped patterns and getting a tubing using the similar kind of Gray Cook band, or even a tubing with a regular handles. That's a much younger me doing a bird dog with load. This gives you a great feedback loop of a lot of people when they extend the leg back, they don't push through the heel, they just lift the leg back. So this is getting some great knee extension and hip extension with load, and the contralateral overhead that's a overhead push pattern essentially, but in a much safer position there. You can do it just with the lower body first, or just the upper body, and break them up. There's some great progressions of that if you look online as well. An abundance of good patterns there. Just make sure you're getting good cueing accordingly with that. This next one, I'm a big fan of crawling patterns and using resistance. That may look pretty tough, and it is a tough exercise if you're doing it with a lot of load. But if you have resistance around the waist, and you have a client that has tender wrists, this is actually offloading the wrists and the shoulders and loading up the hips a lot more, and giving a lot more work to the lower body, and alleviation in the wrists and shoulders for clients when you use resistance tubing, especially if it's from above or behind the client or the athlete. Weight vests would certainly be a big progression and go more into the further end of the phase 3 of the loaded training, and doing bear crawl patterns. Really important. Yes, I did that this morning with 60-something-year-olds at 6:30 a.m. They did bear crawls. They look at me with a level of disdain, but they thank me later because their wrists aren't hurting when they go to get up from the ground and doing things like they're gardening. It seems kind of crazy, but yeah, they love it, and they appreciate it. I had them doing sled pushes this morning too, and they were kicking butt doing it, making some of my younger athletes look pretty weak. It's awesome seeing that happen. So when we get into kneeling and half kneeling anti-gravitational loaded movements, this is that Palloff press or an isometric press. This is a great position to start with, not just go to standing, because we're taking the ankles and knees out of that. They can really focus on keeping the pelvis in a great position, keeping that great hip extension, not going into hip flexion to hold on to stability, and getting the external rotators, the obliques, and a real great loading through that lumbopelvic region there. Start with a real lightweight, keeping the shoulders down, not letting the elbows kick out to the side too far, so they're not getting excessive internal rotation and going into a forward flexion in the spine. Just be aware of that. Always start in a kneeling position, then going into the half kneeling position. You can do pushes and pulls in that position as well. I really like the tall kneeling position, and then progressing to half kneeling. Don't go right into standing positions for pushes and pulls horizontally or vertically. So getting into the gravitational, assisting gravitationally loaded movements. Huge fan of suspension training, using the TRX. There's so many now. Jungle Gym, you name it, there's a Go Flow now, which is pretty cool tool as well. You can find them out there. 10 years ago when I started working with ACE, I think there was maybe a couple. I remember TRX coming out in 2003. I was at the Arnold Classic in Ohio and saw them for the first time. Now it's commonplace for referring to suspension training, but that's just really good marketing. Good job, TRX. Using varying angles to increase and decrease gravitational load is one of the first exercises I use for loaded movement training for my senior population. It's very empowering for them to be able to do that, and it's a little bit of that trust game and being able to trust their grip strength or their ability to have proprioception in different angles, just vertically or versus vertical. 45 degrees is a very foreign position for a lot of our clients in a push and a pull pattern. I do a lot of super band or resistance tubing assisted lunges, putting the tubing up at a high attachment point and then looping it around their arms to do a lunge or a squat pattern. It's taking some of that 9.81 meters per second squared off of them so they can get a more authentic full range of motion, and feeding into some of their dysfunctional forward shifting into the front of their feet and aggravating the knees, and forcing them to sit back into their hips and get a more of a hip hinge versus a quad dominant knee squat. That's a really great tool. If you look at tubing assisted squats or lunges on the web or on our exercise library at ACE, you'll find them. Do some of you folks use this already? Is that something we're seeing out there, Jackie, at all?
It looks like we have a lot of people that are commenting in on different things that they use with their clients. So feel free to keep doing that. And it sounds like we have a lot of comments around using tools specifically for the older clientele that they may have issues with as far as chemicals or the mats or bands or just different substances that are around in facilities that we might need to be aware of. So just something else to think about when you're working with your clients if that is an issue.
Yeah, the latex is a challenging thing, and making sure that if they have suppressed immune systems or some kind of autoimmune challenges, we have to respect that and make sure that sanitation and the quality of the equipment is top notch. And if we don't have that, we've got to adapt. If you don't have latex-free assisted tubing or any kind of resistance tubing, using things like the assisted pull-up machines to do things like a vertical pull-up like this here, instead of using the resistance bands around the knees or the feet. The assisted dip and pull-up machine is another one of my favorite exercises to empower people to do assisted body weight type of movements. And that's really key, is that they're doing those horizontal pull motions first before they're doing their vertical pull motions. And we know all about the push-ups. And I like to use a Smith machine, not for squatting or bench pressing or overhead pressing, but for doing inverted rows and incline push-ups, and using as a assistance or check of balance for lunging and holding onto it to spot themselves, or for squatting so they can sit back into the hips versus leaning back against the bar and using it for kind of a hack squat position. Those are all really great tools that weren't necessarily what the tool was intended for, but with our thinking on our feet and adapting for our senior population, great tools to use for clients in a non-traditional sense. Ultimately, it comes down to making sure that we're progressing and allowing for the specific adaptations to the imposed demands, that said principle, to allow our clients to get a super compensation for that overload, and not progressing more than 10% on volume or intensity. And if even that's too much, especially for some of our folks that are new to exercise, 5% is, or staying with the same load. You have to see how they felt after that last workout. On a 1 to 10 scale, big fan of that. How'd they feel after the last workout? How long were they sore for? Where were they sore? Was it joint focused, or was it more in the musculoskeletal area that they had it? Was it more on one side than the other? Did they have greater hypertonicity in the areas that they carry their hypertonicity after the workouts? So that rule of 10, really have to respect that with our senior populations. And ultimately, that the other part of the rule of 10 is, if their form is decreasing by greater than 10%, you're just getting a bad feedback loop, and you're patterning bad patterns. It's going to set up the next time they do that movement to be a bad start. So the nervous system remembers primacy and recency. It's going to remember the first repetition and the last repetition. And if that last repetition is excessive in compensation, it's just going to feed the next repetition on the first or the first repetition of the next set to be not authentic and not clean. So respect that rule of 10. And I think that it gets us to our summary and wrapping things up with you have to work from the ground up, mobilize as much as the structural system will allow you to, use assistance, use hydrodynamic training if you have the ability before resistance, time under tension, spend time isometrically and eccentrically before you go into concentric movement patterns, and spend a lot of time on that rule of 10. Vet out your clients and make sure that they're well hydrated, they've slept decently, they have some clean quality fuel in their system, and they're in a good place. They're mentally ready for that loaded movement training before you just dive right in. And at this point, if you have questions that hopefully I can answer, I will now. So fire away, Jackie.
Great. Thanks, Sam. So we do have some questions coming in. Everybody is doing a great job using the questions box. So feel free and type those questions in if you have anything that you'd like to ask Sam about. Just as a reminder, there are a lot of different ways that you can connect with ACE. And one of those is in your chat box at the moment. We are going to be continuing the conversation with Sam after today's presentation on our Facebook page. So if you have questions that we don't quite get to today, feel free to type those questions in there, and Sam will be answering those over the next couple days as well. So let's start back at the beginning. We had a couple people kind of hone in on what you said around vibration training, and maybe not having that be such a good idea to use with clients who have artificial joints or joint replacement. Can you just touch on that and maybe reiterate your point there?
Yeah, so vibration training, I'm sure you guys have heard of power plates and vibe plates, those type of tools. And now there's things like vibrating foam rollers. Companies like Hyperice have tools like that can be a significant contraindication in the areas of joint replacements, or if they have screws or plates in their arms or legs, or wherever in their spine even. The risk of that low level frequency, it's anywhere between 20 to 70 hertz of vibration. It can significantly jostle and almost dislodge that the joints, joint replacements, the screws and the likes, and cause much more harm than good. So definitely do your research. There's some great peer-reviewed research on the contraindications. If you go to PubMed or Google Scholar, you can find some great research on there, and the search engines will bring you down the right rabbit hole for educating you on the pros and cons of vibration training for stability and mobility and circulatory training. Again, whole different webinar for vibration training. That's a big rabbit hole to go down, but I figured it's always good to spark that conversation and spark your interest on that. It's a great tool if you know what the right training modality is and the safety around it.
Great. Yeah. So just keeping in mind the type of clientele that we're working with, and specifically in this webinar, speaking about our older clients. So along with those types of clients, you did mention about working from the ground up, and meaning having them get off of the ground to standing. What if we really have clients that are kind of against that, and we're trying to figure out ways that we can work with those clients to make them comfortable in that, as it is a life skill. But how can we talked about this a little bit earlier, but can you reiterate how we can help those clients be more comfortable with that skill?
Yeah, that's something I have a continual challenge with several of my senior clients, and some of them will never do it. And ultimately, we need to do things above all else, do no harm, and that's not just physiologically, that's psychologically, and if they're against that, what's going to ultimately happen? They're going to stop training with us, and they're not going to do any movement. So, what's the return on investment? And longitudinally, if we can get them moving better without putting them on the ground, we're doing well. And some folks, you don't have to put them down on the ground. Having them kneel on a bench, or there are now oversized physical therapy tables that are just 12 inches from the ground, that they literally can sit down on it very easily. It's almost like having a bed without a frame on the ground. Those are some great tools to kind of meet them in the middle.
Great. So again, just understanding what our clients' needs and what are important for our clients to do, and kind of working that within the program in a healthy way. So just a couple more questions, and I realize that it is the top of the hour. So if you do need to exit the webinar, feel free, but just know that we are going to continue to take a couple questions here with Sam. But if you don't get your question answered, please go on to the Facebook link, which is provided into your chat bar. So that link, Sam will be mentioning or taking a few questions for the next couple of days there. Also, please remember that you are listening today for free, but if you would like to receive CECs for today's webinar, you will need to access the recorded version of this presentation, which will likely show up on the web page in the next 24 to 48 hours. So it isn't currently available there, but give us a little bit of time to put this recorded version up onto the past webinars site. The link again is provided on your screen, and you can purchase CECs through that link in the next 24 to 48 hours. So just one or two more questions for you, Sam. Is that good?
That's great.
So we did have a couple of people asking about the isometric recommendations, and specifically for our older clientele, what are some things that we need to think about with working with those populations and doing isometric exercises?
So going back to some of the ground-based patterns, like in a supine position, for example, when we went through the common postural dysfunctions, you have a lot of folks that I keep referring to that have that kyphotic forward flexed elevated shoulder position. One of my favorite kind of posterior chain activation movements is just an isometric press with the elbows into the floor, trying to get the scapula to adduct and retract or depress. The exact opposite of that kyphotic internally rotated forward flex position. By doing a 70% of their maximal effort hold for anywhere between 3 up to 10 seconds, repeating 2 to 3 sets of 10 repetitions, is really a great postural realignment tool, and taking their time and making sure that you as a coach are mindful that they're not using the upper trapezius to do the adduction as the dominant kind of area of work. So it may take some gentle palpation of the upper trap to see that they're not overusing the upper trapezius, and they're actually getting some authentic activation of the middle and lower trapezius and that kind of medial to lower parascapular complex there.
Okay, so generally speaking, that's a great one to use for our, our kyphotic clients, as you mentioned. What do we need to know about using those isometric exercises? Maybe because our older clients could have some high blood pressure issues. Anything that we need to be aware of there?
Yeah, that Valsalva maneuver is something we really have to respect for sure. So when cueing for isometrics, what I'll have them do before they do the isometric activation, Jackie, is take a breath in, try to go through the belly, and have them using a diaphragmatic breath versus this apical breath. I have a colleague of mine that's fantastic with her senior population that is really focused on the breathing and does a lot of reformer and Pilates work. And that's a great tool as well, folks. I encourage you to explore that modality of training. It's loaded and it's supine. So take a look at reformer work, the breathing pattern. So they'll take a diaphragmatic breath in, and as they activate for that isometric hold, they're exhaling, and the end of that isometric contraction is the end of their exhale. So you can keep a longer exhale, try to have them work on as long exhale as you can, sometimes 5. If they can get up to a 10-second exhale, they're really dialed into their diaphragmatic breath. And that's a really important part in opening up that airway and circulatory system and cardiorespiratory system for sure. So great question there.
Great, perfect. So just one last question around the time that we would be working with our senior clients. You mentioned the 10% rule and making sure that we're progressing slowly, which is very important. But do we want to be working with our clients for our full 1 hour regular sessions, or is there a better time frame to be working with them? Does it depend on what you're doing within the session? Kind of what's the time frame that you would normally be working with those clients to get the most bang for your buck there?
Yeah. So the majority of my senior clients, sometimes an hour is just not enough, because the first 25 to even 35 minutes of the workout is spent in phases 1 and 2 of the IFT model. When I get to the loaded movement training, it might be 2 to 3 sets of 4, maybe 5 exercises, and following that kind of principle of the movement-based training model. So I spend quite a bit of time with the myofascial release to reduce the hypertonicity. That's at least 5 to 7 minutes at the beginning of every workout, followed by ground-based, isometrics with pelvic focus and scapulothoracic focus, complementing that with a kind of a sandwich of thoracic mobility and hip mobility and ankle mobility. So that can take quite a bit of time, and I'm not going to rush that. That's certainly something. If they don't have the time of an hour, it may just be 45 minutes, it may be just 30 minutes. But if I can at least get some more mobility and stability, and then they can do the other work that I prescribe for them on their own, I've done my job, and you will have too.
Great, perfect. So just getting to know the client and what they're available to do, what the most important thing is to include within the session for that client, kind of going from there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thanks, Sam. So we, once again, if you would like to continue the conversation with Sam, we do have our Facebook page open and available. We have a chat going on there, and the link for that chat is within your chat box. So feel free to click on that link. And if we didn't quite get your question answered today with our presenter, Sam Barry, please feel free to type your question in there. And thank you, Sam, so much for your time today.
Love to hear from you guys. Keep coming in with the questions. This is always an ongoing journey of education. Thanks a lot, Jackie.
So one last reminder for our next live event we have going on here at ACE. Next month on June 21st, we will be talking with another master trainer of ours, Angel Chelik, for a live class, which is live video demonstration around HIIT training. Busy days call for HIIT. So that will be next month, June 21st at 11 a.m. And you can find the link for that on our ACE live webinars page as well. So once again, thank you for joining us. Have a healthy day.